Zeth Kalar adjusted his breathing apparatus and checked the time display on his wrist device. The meeting was scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. Around him, the diplomatic wing of Harmony Point Station buzzed with activity as Coalition personnel made final preparations for humanity's first official contact with galactic civilization. The young Velthari officer had seen many first contact situations before, but none quite like this. Most new species approach the Coalition with fear or desperation, seeking protection or resources. The humans had been different from the start. They had found the Coalition through their own exploration, arriving at the border systems with a small fleet and a simple message: "We come in peace, but we are prepared for war." Nervous about meeting the mammals? Commander Vel Nash asked, his scaled face showing mild amusement. The older Velthari had decades of experience with new species integration. "Not nervous, sir, curious," Zeth Kalar replied. "Their preliminary communication suggests they have military capabilities far beyond what their technology level should allow." Vel Nash nodded. "That's exactly why we're here. The Science Council wants a full military assessment before any formal treaties are signed." Through the observation deck's transparent walls, Zeth Kalar could see the human ship approaching. It was smaller than most Coalition vessels, but there was something about its design that made him uneasy. The hull seemed too thick, the weapon ports too numerous, and the overall construction too sturdy for what should be a simple diplomatic vessel. "Contact approaching Docking Bay 7, the station's communication system announced. Human delegation requesting permission to board." Zeth Kalar watched as the human ship settled into the docking bay with precise movements. The pilot showed excellent skill, but that was expected. What surprised him was how quickly the humans completed their docking procedures. Most species took at least 20 minutes to properly secure their vessel and run safety checks. The humans did it in 8? "They're efficient," Vel Nash observed. The first human to emerge from the ship was a tall male with short dark hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a uniform that was clearly military in design but with diplomatic markings. Behind him came a smaller female with light brown hair tied back in a practical style. Her uniform was similar but carried different insignia. "Captain Jake Morrison, Human Coalition Navy." The male introduced himself to the waiting Coalition delegation. His voice was calm and confident. "This is Lieutenant Amy Brooks, my tactical officer." Zeth Kalar noted the title. Tactical officer, not communications officer or science officer, but tactical. The humans had brought military expertise to a diplomatic meeting. "Welcome to Harmony Point," Ambassador Krexthul replied in heavily accented standard. The Therian diplomat's forearms spread wide in a gesture of greeting. "We are honored to meet representatives of humanity." "The honor is ours," Morrison replied with a slight bow. "We're grateful for this opportunity to establish formal relations." The initial pleasantries proceeded normally. The humans were polite, respectful, and seemed genuinely interested in peaceful contact. Zeth Kalar began to wonder if the intelligence reports had been exaggerated. Then the alarm started. The station's emergency lighting flickered on, bathing the corridor in red. The communication system crackled to life with urgent warnings. "All personnel to emergency stations. Unidentified vessels approaching the station. Repeat, unidentified vessels approaching the station." Zeth Kalar felt his blood chill. Pirates. They had been plaguing this sector for months, but Harmony Point was supposed to be neutral territory. "How many ships?" Morrison asked, his entire demeanor changing in an instant. The polite diplomat was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. "Sensors show 4 vessels. Heavy cruiser class." The station commander's voice came through the intercom. "They're demanding we surrender all cargo and passengers." The Coalition delegates looked at each other with worry. 4 heavy cruisers against a diplomatic station was hopeless. Harmony Point had defensive weapons, but nothing that could stand against that kind of firepower. "What's the station's defensive capability?" Brooks asked, pulling out a small device that began displaying tactical information. "Lieutenant Brooks, we should evacuate to the inner levels," Ambassador Krexthul said nervously. "Standard protocol for pirate attacks is to secure diplomatic personnel." "Standard protocol assumes you're going to surrender," Morrison replied. "We don't surrender," The human captain was already moving toward the command center with Brooks close behind. Zeth-Kalar and Velnash followed, more out of curiosity than duty. Station Commander, this is Captain Morrison. We're offering our assistance in defending this station. Captain, with respect, you have one small ship. The pirates have 4 cruisers. Then we'll have to be creative. Zeth-Kalar watched in fascination as the humans took control of the situation. Morrison began issuing orders with calm authority, while Brooks analyzed the tactical display with frightening speed. "Amy, what's our advantage?" Morrison asked. "They're overconfident," Brooks replied immediately. "They're approaching in standard formation, expecting easy surrender. They haven't bothered to scan for defensive capabilities. Station Commander, can you power down all non-essential systems and reroute power to shields?" "Yes, but that will only buy us minutes." "Minutes are enough. Amy, can you access the station's communication array?" "Already on it," Brooks said, her fingers flying over the control panel. "I'm broadcasting a distress signal on human frequencies. If any of our ships are in range, they'll know we're in trouble." "Good. Now, do we have any maintenance shuttles in the docking bays?" The station commander looked confused. "Yes, but they're unarmed civilian craft." "Perfect." Zeth-Kalar was completely lost. How were maintenance shuttles going to help against heavy cruisers? "Commander Velnash," Morrison said, turning to the senior coalition officer, "I need your permission to implement human tactical doctrine." "What does that involve?" "Making the pirates wish they had never heard of Harmony Point." Velnash looked uncertain, but nodded. "Proceed, Captain." What happened next was unlike anything Zeth-Kalar had ever witnessed. The humans didn't just respond to the pirate attack. They turned it into an opportunity. Brooks used the station's communication array to broadcast false surrender negotiations, buying time while secretly coordinating with the maintenance crews. She convinced the pirates that the station was preparing to surrender, all while Morrison organized a counterattack using resources that shouldn't have been weapons. The maintenance shuttles were loaded with spare reactor cores and sent on automated courses toward the pirate ships. To the pirates, they looked like cargo containers being ejected as tribute. When they moved in to collect their prizes, the humans remotely detonated the reactor cores. 2 pirate cruisers were destroyed instantly. The third was heavily damaged and barely able to maintain power. The 4th tried to retreat, but Morrison had anticipated this. "Amy, now." Brooks activated a program she had secretly installed in the station's sensor array. It created false readings that made the retreating pirate ship think there were coalition warships approaching from multiple directions. In panic, the pirates turned back toward the station directly into the range of the defensive weapons. "Target their engines," Morrison ordered. "We want them alive." The battle was over in less than 20 minutes. What should have been a devastating pirate raid had become a complete victory for the station, with 3 pirate ships destroyed and 1 captured with its crew intact. "How?" Velnash asked in amazement. "Simple," Morrison replied. "We didn't fight their strength. We fought their assumptions." Zeth-Kalar stared at the tactical display showing the debris field where the pirate ships had been. The humans had taken a hopeless situation and turned it into a trap. They had used civilian equipment as weapons, turned the station's communication array into a tactical advantage, and exploited their enemies' overconfidence. "Captain Morrison," Ambassador Krexthul said, his voice filled with awe and something that might have been fear. "Your species has a unique approach to warfare. We prefer to think of it as problem-solving," Brooks replied with a slight smile. As the humans returned to their diplomatic duties, Zeth-Kalar found himself deeply unsettled. He had expected to observe a routine first contact meeting. Instead, he had witnessed something that would change his understanding of warfare forever. The humans didn't just fight battles. They reimagined them completely. 6 months after the incident at Harmony Point, Zeth-Kalar found himself on the fortress world of Calith Prime, watching the siege that had already claimed thousands of coalition lives. The Shendari Empire had surrounded the planet with their massive fleet, cutting off all supply lines and slowly grinding down the defenders with superior technology and firepower. Zeth-Kalar stood on the command tower's observation deck, looking out over the scarred landscape. Craters from orbital bombardments dotted the surface like pockmarks. The defensive shields flickered constantly under the endless barrage from above. Food was running low, ammunition was nearly gone, and morale was at its lowest point since the siege began. "Another supply convoy destroyed this morning," Commander Velnash reported, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The Shendari intercepted it 3 hours out from the planet." Through his binoculars, Szeth Kalar could see the enemy positions in the distance. Massive Shendari war machines moved across the horizon like metal mountains, their weapons charging for another bombardment. Their technology was at least 50 years ahead of anything the Coalition possessed. Their armor was thicker, their shields stronger, their weapons more powerful. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human fleet," the communications officer announced. Szeth Kalar felt a mix of hope and curiosity. After what he had witnessed at Harmony Point, he was eager to see how humans would handle a conventional siege. The Coalition had been fighting by standard military doctrine for months with no success. Perhaps human methods would prove more effective. "This is General Marcus Kane of the Human Expeditionary Force," the voice came through the speakers. It was deep and calm, with an accent Szeth Kalar didn't recognize. "We're requesting permission to land ground forces and assist in the defense of Kaleth Prime." "General Kane, this is Coalition Command," Velnash replied. "We welcome any assistance, but I should warn you the situation is quite desperate. The Shendari have us completely surrounded and outgunned." "Understood, Commander. We're not here to outgun them. We're here to outthink them." 3 hours later, Szeth Kalar watched as human dropships descended through the defensive shields. The ships were different from Coalition transports. They were smaller, faster, and seemed designed to avoid detection rather than carry maximum cargo. The first human officer to reach the command center was a tall woman with short red hair and intense green eyes. Her uniform was practical and showed signs of recent combat. Behind her came a mixed group of human soldiers, each carrying equipment that Szeth Kalar didn't recognize. "Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Hayes, Special Operations," the woman introduced herself, with a crisp salute. "General Kane is establishing a forward command post. He sent me to coordinate with Coalition forces." "What's your assessment of our situation?" Velnash asked. Hayes studied the tactical displays for several minutes before responding. "You've been fighting their strengths instead of exploiting their weaknesses." "What weaknesses?" "Their technology is superior in every way." "Their technology? Yes, but not their psychology." Szeth Kalar leaned forward, interested. This sounded similar to what he had heard from Morrison and Brooks at Harmony Point. "The Shendari are methodical," Hayes continued. "They follow established patterns, stick to proven tactics, and rely on their technological advantage. That makes them predictable." "How does predictability help us when they can simply blast through our defenses?" Hayes smiled, and Szeth Kalar felt a chill run down his spine. It was the same smile he had seen on Morrison's face just before the pirates at Harmony Point realized they had been trapped. "Because we're not going to fight their defenses. We're going to fight their confidence." Over the next week, Szeth Kalar watched as the humans implemented tactics that seemed to make no sense according to standard military doctrine. Instead of concentrating their forces for maximum defensive capability, they spread them out in small groups across the planet's surface. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, a stocky human with an easy smile, began setting up what he called surprises throughout the abandoned sections of the city. These weren't traditional mines or defensive positions. They were psychological weapons designed to create fear and uncertainty. "The thing about siege warfare," Rodriguez explained to Szeth Kalar, as they watched him work, "is that the attackers get comfortable. They think they know what to expect, so we give them something unexpected." The first surprise came on the third night of human involvement. A Shendari patrol unit was investigating a supposedly abandoned building when the entire structure collapsed on them. But it wasn't a simple demolition. Rodriguez had rigged the building to fall in a specific pattern, creating a maze of twisted metal and concrete that trapped the survivors in a psychological nightmare of echoing sounds and shifting shadows. "Rescue teams will spend hours getting them out," Rodriguez said with satisfaction. and every minute they spend on rescue is a minute they're not spending on attack. The psychological campaign escalated quickly. Tech specialist Sam Walker used the planet's communication networks to broadcast false reports into Shendari frequencies. The reports described coalition reinforcements that didn't exist, secret weapons that were never built, and tactical movements that were completely fictional. The enemy commanders are getting contradictory intelligence, Walker explained to the coalition officers. They're starting to second-guess their own scouts and question their battle plans. But it was the night raids that truly demonstrated human warfare philosophy. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes led small teams of soldiers into enemy territory, not to engage in direct combat but to create chaos and fear. Seth Kalar accompanied one of these raids more as an observer than a participant. He watched in amazement as Hayes and her team infiltrated a Shendari forward base without firing a single shot. Instead, they sabotaged equipment in subtle ways, planted false intelligence reports, and left behind signs that they had been there, without actually harming anyone. "Why didn't you attack them directly?" Seth Kalar asked as they retreated. "Because a dead enemy can't be afraid," Hayes replied. "A living enemy who knows we can reach him anytime we want will spread that fear." To his friends, the effect was immediate and devastating. Shendari patrols became nervous and trigger-happy, sometimes firing on their own forces in the darkness. Supply convoys requested additional escorts, tying up resources that should have been used for the siege. Command posts increased security measures, slowing down decision-making and communication. General Kane's strategy became clear after 2 weeks. He wasn't trying to break the siege through superior firepower. He was breaking it by making the Shendari break themselves. "They're starting to make mistakes," Velnash observed during a command briefing. "Their bombardment patterns are becoming erratic. Their patrol schedules are inconsistent." "Fear makes people stupid," Kane replied simply. "And stupid enemies make tactical errors." The breakthrough came when a Shendari commander, paranoid about human infiltration, ordered his forces to fall back to more defensible positions. This created a gap in their siege line that Kane immediately exploited, not with a direct attack, but with a carefully planned deception. Using Walker's communication skills and Rodriguez's demolition expertise, the humans created the illusion of a massive coalition counterattack from the gap. False radio chatter, staged explosions, and carefully timed movements convinced the Shendari that they were facing a full-scale breakout attempt. The enemy response was exactly what Kane had predicted. Instead of investigating carefully, the Shendari rushed forces to contain what they thought was a major threat. This left other sections of their siege line weakened and exposed. "Now we hit them where they're not looking," Kane announced. The final assault came from an unexpected direction. While the Shendari were focused on the false breakout, Hayes led a coordinated strike against their orbital bombardment platforms. Using captured enemy equipment and forged identification codes, her teams infiltrated the platforms and sabotaged them from within. Without their orbital support, the Shendari ground forces found themselves vulnerable for the first time in months. The coalition forces, reinforced by human tactics and boosted by weeks of enemy psychological deterioration, broke the siege in a single day. Seth Kalar stood in the ruins of a Shendari command post, watching human soldiers process prisoners, who seemed more relieved than defeated. Many of the enemy troops appeared exhausted and jumpy, constantly looking over their shoulders as if expecting another human surprise. "How do you sleep at night?" one captured Shendari officer asked Hayes during his interrogation. "Better than you do," she replied calmly. Later, as the coalition celebrated their unexpected victory, Seth Kalar found himself alone with General Kane on the command tower. "Your people don't fight like anyone else," Seth Kalar observed. Kane nodded slowly. "War isn't about having the biggest gun. It's about making your enemy afraid to use theirs." The Shendari had every advantage: better technology, more ships, superior firepower. "They had everything except understanding their enemy," Kane replied. "They thought they were fighting the coalition. They never realized they were fighting humanity." As Seth Kalar watched the human ships prepare to depart, he felt a deep unease settling in his mind. 2 years after the siege of Caleth Prime, Zethkalar received orders that filled him with both excitement and dread. He was being assigned to Meridian Station as a military liaison officer. The massive supply depot orbited a gas giant in neutral space, serving as a critical hub for medical supplies bound for coalition colonies suffering from the Red Plague outbreak. Zethkalar had specifically requested this assignment because he knew humans were stationed there. After witnessing their unconventional tactics twice before, he wanted to study their methods more closely. What he didn't expect was to witness the most terrifying display of human determination he would ever see. The station was larger than most cities, with dozens of levels dedicated to storage, processing, and distribution of medical supplies. Commander Paul Stevens, the human officer in charge of station defense, gave Zethkalar a tour on his first day. "We process supplies for over 200 colonies," Stevens explained as they walked through endless corridors lined with medical containers. "If this station falls, millions of beings will die from the plague within months." Stevens was a quiet man with graying hair and tired eyes. Unlike the charismatic officers Zethkalar had met before, he seemed worn down by responsibility. His uniform was clean but showed signs of constant wear, and he moved like someone carrying a heavy burden. "The station seems well defended," Zethkalar observed, noting the weapon placements and shield generators. "Well enough for normal threats," Stevens replied, "but intelligence suggests the Ravager fleet might be moving into this sector." Zethkalar felt his blood chill. The Ravager fleet was a collection of pirates, mercenaries, and criminals united under the warlord Krexgoth. They had been raiding coalition supply lines for months, selling captured medical supplies to the highest bidder while colonies died from lack of treatment. "If they attack, evacuation protocols call for immediate withdrawal," Zethkalar said, reciting standard procedure. Stevens stopped walking and looked at him directly. "We won't be evacuating." "Sir, standard coalition doctrine clearly states that supply depots should not be defended against overwhelming force. The supplies can be replaced, not in time to save the colonies and not these supplies." Stevens gestured to the containers around them. "Do you know what's in these shipments?" Zethkalar shook his head. "The only effective treatment for Red Plague. It takes 8 months to manufacture each batch. If we lose what's here, there won't be time to make more before the outbreak spreads beyond control." The attack came 3 days later. Zethkalar was in the command center when the alarms began blaring. Through the observation windows, he could see enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace like falling stars. The scanner displays showed numbers that made his heart sink. 47 enemy vessels, reported Chief Petty Officer Maria Santos, a compact human woman with oil-stained hands and sharp eyes, including 6 heavy cruisers and 2 dreadnoughts. Against this force, Meridian Station had 12 defensive platforms and a handful of patrol ships. By any reasonable calculation, the battle would be over in minutes. "All stations, this is Commander Stevens." The human's voice came over the intercom, calm despite the impossible odds. "We are not evacuating, we are not surrendering, we are holding this station until relief arrives or until there's nothing left of us to hold it." "Sir," Zethkalar said urgently, "this is suicide. No shame exists in tactical withdrawal when facing impossible odds." Stevens looked at him with those tired eyes. "You're right. This probably is suicide. But sometimes the right thing to do is also the stupid thing to do." What followed was unlike any battle Zethkalar had ever witnessed. The humans didn't fight like they were trying to win. They fought like they were trying to make their deaths cost as much as possible. Chief Santos performed miracles with the station systems. When the main power grid took damage, she rerouted power through the waste recycling system. When the defensive shields overloaded, she used the loading bay force fields as makeshift barriers. When the weapon platforms ran out of ammunition, she turned the cargo launchers into improvised mass drivers, hurling supply containers at enemy ships with devastating effect. "Maria, we need more power to the forward shields," Stevens called out as explosions rocked the station. "I'm pulling it from life support on levels 12 through 18, Santos replied, her hands flying over the control panels. "We've got maybe 20 minutes of air on those levels." "Do it." Dr. Kevin Liu, the station's chief medical officer, refused to evacuate the medical bay even as enemy boarding parties fought their way through the outer levels. Zeth-Kalar watched in amazement as the human doctor continued treating wounded coalition soldiers while plasma bolts flew past the medical bay windows. "Doctor, you need to move to a secure location," Zeth-Kalar urged. "My patients can't be moved," Liu replied calmly, applying bandages to a wounded Therian Marine. "If I leave them, they die, so I'm not leaving." The human doctor worked with steady, hands even as the station shook around him. When enemy fire cut the power to his medical equipment, he continued treatment using manual tools and battery-powered devices. When the medical bay's walls were breached, he simply moved his patients to the interior rooms and kept working. Private First Class Tony Mitchell, barely old enough to be called an adult by human standards, single-handedly held the communication center against 3 separate boarding attempts. Zeth-Kalar watched through security cameras as the young human used furniture, medical equipment, and maintenance tools to create improvised defenses. "Why doesn't he retreat to a better position?" Zeth-Kalar asked. "Because without communications, we can't coordinate the defense," Stevens replied. "Tony knows that if he leaves that room, we all die separately instead of together." The young human fought with desperate creativity, turning the communication center into a fortress using whatever he could find. When his weapon ran out of power, he used tools from the maintenance closet. When the tools broke, he used his bare hands. When enemy soldiers finally breached his position, he was still transmitting coordinates to the remaining defensive positions. Captain Sue Ellen Davis managed the impossible task of evacuating non-essential personnel while the battle raged around her. Zeth-Kalar watched as she organized evacuation shuttles under enemy fire, making split-second decisions about who could be saved and who would have to stay. "We can take 12 more on this shuttle," she reported to Stevens. "Medical personnel only," Stevens replied. "Everyone else stays." Davis didn't argue. She simply helped load wounded medical staff onto the shuttle and sent it away, knowing she was probably watching their last chance for escape disappear into space. As the battle continued, Zeth-Kalar began to understand something that terrified him. The humans weren't just willing to die for their mission. They were eager to make their deaths meaningful. Every sacrifice bought more time. Every loss inflicted damage on the enemy. Every act of courage inspired others to fight harder. "Sir, enemy forces have breached Level 5, Santos reported. They're heading for the medical storage areas. Seal the blast doors, Stevens ordered. "Sir, that will trap our people on those levels. Do it." Stevens's voice never wavered, never showed emotion, but Zeth-Kalar could see the pain in the human commander's eyes. Every order he gave condemned more of his people to death, and every one of them followed those orders without hesitation. The end came after 18 hours of continuous fighting. Enemy forces had captured most of the station, but the humans had made them pay for every corridor, every room, every supply container. The medical storage areas were still secure, protected by blast doors and defended by the last few human soldiers. "Stevens, this is Krexgoth," the enemy warlord's voice came through the communication system. "Surrender now and I'll let your people live." Stevens looked around the command center at his remaining staff. Santos was unconscious from blood loss, her hands still gripping the control panels. Liu was visible through the medical bay windows, still treating wounded even though enemy soldiers were just outside his door. Mitchell's communication station had gone silent hours ago. "This is Commander Stevens," the human replied. "I have a counteroffer." "I'm listening. You can have the station, but the medical supplies stay here." Krexgoth laughed. "You're in no position to make demands, human." "Actually, I am." Stevens pressed a button on his console. "Chief Santos rigged the medical storage areas to explode if anyone tries to access them without the proper codes. Codes that only I know." "You're bluffing. I'm human. We don't bluff about things like this." There was a long silence. Then Krexgoth spoke again, his voice tight with anger. "You would destroy supplies needed to save millions of lives?" "I would prevent you from selling those supplies while millions die," Stevens corrected. "The supplies stay here, or nobody gets them. And, if I simply leave, then coalition relief forces will arrive in 6 hours, and the supplies will be distributed as intended. Zeth Kalar watched in fascination as the human commander turned a total defeat into a negotiating position. Even with his station captured, his forces destroyed, and his own death certain, Stevens was still fighting. The Ravager fleet withdrew 2 hours before coalition reinforcements arrived. They had won the battle but lost the war. The medical supplies were saved. 3 months after the incident at Meridian Station, Zeth Kalar found himself aboard the coalition vessel Deep Explorer, part of a joint task force hunting the most elusive enemy the galaxy had ever known. The Ghost Fleet had been striking supply, convoys and colonies for over a year, appearing from nowhere, hitting their targets with devastating precision, and vanishing before any response could be mounted. The task force included ships from 6 different coalition species, all equipped with the most advanced sensors and tracking technology available. They had been searching for weeks without finding so much as a trace of the enemy. Every lead turned cold, every trap came up empty, and every prediction proved wrong. Another convoy attacked at Vega 7, reported the intelligence officer, a nervous Beltani with twitching antennae. Same pattern as before. Ships appeared, destroyed the escorts, looted the cargo, and disappeared before our patrol could respond. Admiral Thax Duran of the Velthari Navy studied the tactical display. With growing frustration, the Velthari were known for their logical approach to warfare, but logic seemed useless against an enemy that defied every predictable pattern. How many ships this time? The Admiral asked. Unknown. Survivors report seeing vessels that didn't match any known configuration. The attacks lasted exactly 17 minutes, then nothing. Zeth Kalar leaned forward from his position at the observation station. After everything he had witnessed, he was beginning to understand that conventional thinking would never solve this problem. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just using advanced technology. They were using something more dangerous. Sir, incoming transmission from the Human Task Force, the communications officer announced. Put them through. The main screen flickered to life, showing a woman with steel gray hair and calculating eyes. Her uniform bore insignia that Zeth Kalar didn't recognize, but her bearing suggested extensive command experience. Admiral Thax Duran, this is Admiral Grace Patterson of the Human Strategic Fleet. We're requesting permission to join your hunt for the Ghost Fleet. Admiral Patterson, we welcome any assistance, Thax Duran replied formally. Though I should warn you, this enemy has proven remarkably elusive. Our best tactical analysts have been unable to predict their movements. That's because you're trying to predict where they'll go next, Patterson replied. We prefer to understand why they go where they go. 4 hours later, Zeth Kalar watched as human ships took positions throughout the coalition fleet. They were smaller vessels built for speed and stealth rather than heavy combat. Each ship seemed designed for a specific purpose, like pieces of a puzzle that would only make sense when assembled. The human officers who came aboard Deep Explorer were unlike any military personnel Zeth Kalar had met before. Captain Rick Thompson, the reconnaissance specialist, carried equipment that looked more like scientific instruments than military gear. Lieutenant Commander Beth Turner, the intelligence officer, spent her time studying psychological profiles rather than tactical reports. What's your assessment of the situation? Admiral Thax Duran asked during the first joint briefing. You're hunting the wrong thing, Turner replied bluntly. You're looking for ships when you should be looking for patterns. You're tracking technology when you should be tracking behavior. The Ghost Fleet uses some form of advanced stealth technology, the Coalition intelligence officer protested. Our sensors can't detect them. That's not stealth technology, Captain Thompson said, studying the attack reports. That's knowledge. They know where you're going to look, so they make sure they're not there. Navigator Pete Johnson, a quiet human with sharp eyes, spread out a star chart covered in complex calculations. Look at the timing of the attacks. They're not random. There's a pattern, but it's not based on military strategy. What kind of pattern? Zeth Kalar asked, genuinely curious. Economic. The Ghost Fleet attacks when cargo prices are highest and when coalition patrols are thinnest. They're not military raiders, they're businessmen. Chief Analyst Nina Foster pulled up detailed profiles on her portable display. We've been studying the survivors' reports. The attacks are too precise, too efficient. These aren't random pirates. They have inside information. Admiral Patterson nodded approvingly at her officer's assessments. The Ghost Fleet succeeds because they understand their enemy better than their enemy understands them. They know Coalition patrol schedules, cargo routes, and response times. The question is how. You're suggesting we have traitors in our ranks? Admiral Thax Duran asked, his voice tight with anger. I'm suggesting you have predictable habits, Patterson corrected. The Ghost Fleet doesn't need spies when they can simply observe and learn. Over the next several days, Szeth Kalar watched as the humans completely changed the nature of the hunt. Instead of trying to track the Ghost Fleet's ships, they began tracking the fleet's psychology. Turner analyzed every attack for behavioral patterns, looking for signs of the enemy's decision-making process. They're cautious, she reported during a briefing. Every attack is carefully planned and perfectly executed. They never take unnecessary risks, never stay longer than required, never attack targets that might fight back effectively. That suggests they're not warriors, Thompson added. They're opportunists. They'll only fight when they're certain they can win. Johnson's navigation analysis revealed something even more important. Their attack patterns suggest they have a base of operations within Coalition space. Somewhere they can monitor our activities and plan their raids. How can you be certain? Admiral Thax Duran asked. Because they respond to our movements too quickly, Johnson explained. When we change patrol routes, they adjust their attack patterns within days. That's not possible if they're operating from outside Coalition space. Foster's psychological profiles painted a picture of an enemy that was both familiar and alien. They understand Coalition psychology better than most Coalition officers do. They know exactly how long it takes for our commanders to make decisions, how our bureaucracy works, how our different species interact. Which means they've been studying us for a long time, Patterson concluded. This isn't a recent threat. The Ghost Fleet has been watching and learning for years before they started attacking. The breakthrough came when Turner made a connection that no one else had considered. What if the Ghost Fleet isn't one organization? What if it's a network of smaller groups working together? Explain, Admiral Thax Duran requested. Look at the attack patterns again. Each raid uses different tactics, different ship configurations, different approaches. It's like watching several different commanders, not one. Thompson nodded enthusiastically. That would explain the intelligence gathering. Instead of one group of spies, you have dozens of small cells feeding information to each other. And it would explain why they're so hard to track, Johnson added. We're not hunting one fleet. We're hunting an entire shadow network. Foster pulled up communication intercepts from the past year. If Lieutenant Commander Turner is right, then somewhere in all this data should be evidence of coordination between different groups. The analysis took 3 days. Working around the clock, the human intelligence team sifted through thousands of communications, looking for patterns that Coalition analysts had missed. They found subtle codes hidden in commercial transmissions, meeting schedules disguised as shipping manifests, and coordination signals embedded in routine administrative messages. Got them, Foster announced finally. The Ghost Fleet is coordinating their operations through the civilian communication network. They're using legitimate business channels to pass military intelligence. How many cells are involved? Patterson asked. At least 12 separate groups operating across Coalition space. Each one feeds intelligence to the others, but they rarely operate in the same sector at the same time. Admiral Thax Duran stared at the evidence with growing amazement. How did you see what our analysts missed? We didn't look for what they were hiding, Turner explained. We looked for what they were thinking. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to predict where the Ghost Fleet would strike next, the humans created a situation where the enemy would have to reveal themselves. We're going to make them desperate, Patterson explained during the final briefing. Desperate enough to take risks they've been avoiding. The plan involved spreading false information through the same communication channels the Ghost Fleet was using. Johnson created fake shipping schedules for extremely valuable cargo. Foster planted psychological profiles suggesting that Coalition forces were demoralized and vulnerable. Thompson arranged for patrol schedules to appear compromised. The Ghost Fleet has been successful because they only attack when they're certain of victory, Patterson said. We're going to offer them a target so tempting that they'll attack even when they're not certain. The bait was a single transport carrying what appeared to be prototype weapons technology. According to the planted intelligence, the transport was lightly defended and following a predictable route through a remote system. Zethkalar was aboard one of the hidden coalition ships when the Ghost Fleet took the bait. Watching the enemy vessels appear on sensors was like watching ghosts become solid. Ships materialized from empty space, their stealth systems disengaging as they moved to attack the transport. 20 years had passed since the Ghost Fleet incident, and Zethkalar sat in Murphy's bar on New Geneva Station, nursing a drink that had gone warm an hour ago. The establishment was a quiet place where retired military personnel from across the coalition came to forget about wars they had fought and friends they had lost. Across from him sat Junior Officer Kyle Thara, a young Velthari who had specifically requested this meeting. Her scales still held the bright green color of youth, and her eyes burned with the eager curiosity that reminded Zethkalar of himself, decades ago. "Senior Officer Zethkalar," she said formally. "I've read all the official reports about human, military operations, but I wanted to hear about them from someone who was actually there." Zethkalar looked at the young officer and saw himself as he had been at Harmony Point, full of confidence in his understanding of warfare, and certain that the galaxy followed predictable rules. The years had worn away that certainty, leaving behind something much more complex. "Why do you want to know about human warfare?" he asked. "Because they're different," Kyle Thara replied. "Every other species follows standard military doctrine, but humans seem to rewrite the rules every time they fight. I want to understand how they think." "Be careful what you wish for," Zethkalar said quietly. "Understanding humans changes you." Behind the bar, Joe Murphy continued cleaning glasses with the methodical precision of someone who had learned to focus on simple tasks. The human was older now, his hair completely gray, and his hands marked with scars from battles Zethkalar could only imagine. Murphy had been running this bar for 15 years, serving drinks to veterans who needed a place where they could speak freely about things they couldn't discuss anywhere else. "You've been telling her the war stories," Murphy said without looking up from his work. "Did you get to the part where you explain what it costs?" Zethkalar nodded slowly. "I was getting to that." "What costs?" Kyle Thara asked, confusion evident in her voice. Murphy set down his glass and looked directly at the young officer. His eyes held a weight that reminded Zethkalar of Commander Stevens at Meridian Station, the same burden of responsibility and sacrifice. "Kid, you want to know how humans fight? We fight by becoming the thing we're fighting against, and then we have to live with what we've become." "I don't understand." Zethkalar leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. "At Harmony Point, I watched humans turn a diplomatic station into a trap that destroyed 4 pirate ships. Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Brooks made decisions that saved everyone on that station. But afterward, I saw them sitting alone, staring at the wreckage they had created. They were victorious. They should have been celebrating. They were thinking about the pirates who died," Murphy said quietly, wondering if there had been another way, questioning whether they had made the right choice. "That's what makes humans dangerous, kid. We don't just win battles. We carry them with us forever." Kyle Thara looked puzzled. "But carrying guilt makes you weaker, not stronger." "Does it?" Zethkalar asked. "At Calith Prime, I watched General Kane break a 6-month siege by turning the enemy's minds against them. He used fear and confusion as weapons, making soldiers afraid to trust their own commanders. It was brilliant and effective. And after the victory, Kane spent 3 days visiting wounded enemy soldiers in the medical bay. He spoke to each, one personally, not as a conqueror but as someone seeking forgiveness for what he had been forced to do." Murphy nodded grimly. "Marcus came through here a few years back, still asks about those soldiers, still wonders if he could have found a way to win without breaking their spirits." "That doesn't make sense," Kyle Thara protested. "Why feel guilt? For defeating your enemies?" "Because humans understand that enemies are just people on the other side of a line," Zethkalar explained. "At Meridian Station, Commander Stevens chose to let his people die rather than abandon civilians who needed medical supplies. but he also chose to let enemy soldiers live when he could have killed them. The Ravager fleet had attacked them. They deserved to die. That's what most species would think, Murphy said, refilling their drinks. But Stevens understood that those soldiers were following orders, just like his own people. The real enemy was the system that put them in conflict, not the individuals caught in it. Zethkalar remembered the conversation he had with Stevens after the battle. The human commander had been sitting in the ruins of his station, surrounded by the bodies of his crew, and his first concern had been for the enemy prisoners who were wounded in the fighting. "He told me something that still haunts me," Zethkalar said. "He said that the hardest part of being human isn't winning battles. It's remembering that your enemies have families who love them, just like your own people do. But that knowledge makes them hesitate," Kelthera argued. "It makes them weak." "No," Murphy said firmly. "It makes them careful. There's a difference." At the Ghost Fleet operation, Zethkalar continued, Admiral Patterson spent weeks learning to think like her enemies. She understood their psychology, better than they understood themselves. But after the battle, she insisted on personally interviewing every captured enemy officer, for intelligence purposes, to understand who they were as individuals, to learn their names, their backgrounds, their reasons for fighting. She wanted to make sure she remembered them as people, not just as tactical problems to be solved. Murphy walked around the bar and sat down with them, something he rarely did. His expression was serious, the look of someone about to share a difficult truth. "You want to know the real difference between humans and other species? Other species fight to win. Humans fight to end the fighting. Every battle we win brings us closer to a galaxy where battles aren't necessary." "That's impossible," Kelthera said. "There will always be conflicts. Different species have different needs, different goals." "Maybe," Zethkalar said. "But humans believe that understanding leads to peace. Every enemy they defeat, they try to understand. Every victory they achieve, they use to build bridges instead of walls." He thought about all the human officers he had served with over the years. Morrison had become a diplomatic instructor, teaching other species how to resolve conflicts without violence. Kane had founded a center for psychological warfare ethics, helping military officers understand the moral implications of their tactics. Stevens had dedicated his retirement to improving medical supply distribution, ensuring that no colony would ever again face the choice between medicine and security. "But what about the price?" Kelthera asked. "You mentioned that human methods have a cost." Murphy was quiet for a long moment, staring into his drink. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The price is that we remember everything. Every enemy we've defeated, every life we've taken, every choice we've made. Other species can forget their wars and move on. Humans carry every battle with us until the day we die." "I've seen human veterans," Zethkalar added. "They don't celebrate their victories. They mourn their necessity. They don't boast about their enemies' defeats. They honor their enemies' courage." "Why?" Kelthera asked, genuinely confused. "Because understanding your enemy means understanding that they're not really different from you," Murphy explained. "And if they're not different from you, then their deaths are tragedies, not victories." Zethkalar finished his drink and stood up slowly. The weight of years and memories made every movement deliberate. "Junior Officer Kelthera, you asked me to explain human warfare. Here's what I've learned. Humans don't fight because they love war. They fight because they love peace. They don't defeat enemies because they hate them. They defeat enemies because they understand them. And that understanding," Murphy added, "changes both the defeated and the victorious. It makes the defeated more human, and it makes the victorious more responsible." "I still don't understand why that's frightening," Kelthera admitted. Zethkalar looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "Because once you truly understand someone, you become responsible for their welfare. Humans don't just win wars. They become responsible for their enemies' futures. They carry the burden of everyone they've ever fought, everyone they've ever defeated, everyone they've ever saved. And that responsibility never ends," Murphy said quietly. "It just grows heavier with every victory." As Kelthera left the bar, Still processing what she had learned, Zeth Kalar remained seated with Murphy. The old human bartender continued, cleaning glasses, but his movements had slowed. "Do you regret it?" Zeth Kalar asked. "Carrying all that weight?" Murphy considered the question for a long time. "No," he said finally, "but I understand why it scares you. A species that treats their enemies like family is either the most noble thing in the galaxy or the most dangerous. Which do you think it is?" Murphy smiled sadly. "Both. That's what makes us human." As Zeth Kalar walked back to his quarters, he reflected on the stories he had shared and the truths he had revealed. He had spent decades trying to understand human warfare, only to realize that the real mystery wasn't how humans fought. The real mystery was how they lived with themselves afterward, and perhaps that was the most frightening thing of all about humanity. They had found a way to wage war while keeping their souls intact,